All right, so I just wanted to welcome everybody to the 18th annual Bend Film Festival. My name is Alicia Vickery, and I'm just a local film supporter and a teacher here in town. And I'm lucky enough to introduce you to two filmmakers here that have a documentary in this year's festival. And I just thought I would throw it out to you to introduce the two of yourselves. It's Seth and Corey, and your title and roles for the film Havana Libre.
Yeah, I'm Corey. I directed Havana Libre.
And I'm Seth, and I was the DP and editor on the film.
So after watching this film, I was pretty deeply moved about, I've never been to Cuba, and I'm not a surfer, but I love surfing. I love, the culture and everything that, surrounds it. I was curious with the two of you, like the background of what found you making this movie and what was your inspiration for making the movie?
Yeah. Well, we haven't always been surfers ourselves. Kind of got into it when we moved to California, but we've always been around like extreme sports. We grew up making films together, like skiing and skateboarding, and that was where we really found our passion for making films. And so surfing, we just got the bug out here, and it's also such a meditative, amazing sport that I don't know, the fascination kind of grew from there. And in Cuba, our initial exploration to Cuba had very little to do with surfing, but by happenstance, I met Frank and Yaya there, and their story just seemed really, really compelling. And so combined with like the kind of new interest in surf and their super unique story in surfing, we got really excited about it and started to follow it down the rabbit hole.
Yeah, quite a cool rabbit hole. When did you make the movie? And when did you when you made your plan to go to Cuba, like what did that look like in making this movie? I was really curious.
Oh, I can explain this. It began in 2016. Basically, Corey was like, and he over phone or text or something. We weren't together at this time. We were kind of doing our own separate things. He's like, I want to go to Cuba and make a film. You need to come. And I said, cool, let's plan it. It's going to take time. How do we research it? And he said, I'm going. Are you coming or not? And I was like, Corey, bad idea. And then he said, I'm going. Are you coming or not? And I was like, okay, I'm going. So we showed up in Cuba with a very small idea of what we were going to do. And Corey had told me about Frank, and we were going to make a short film. We were like, well, we can do one thing, and that's to make a short film about this guy who makes surfboards out of refrigerator foam. And I was like, that is amazing, worth our time. Let's go explore. And I've always wanted to go to Cuba. It's a place that I've been kind of interested in since I was a very little kid. So we just showed up and we followed our plan, which is plan to break the plan.
We did try to make a plan, but it was just really, really challenging at the time because of internet access. So I started messaging with them like maybe 4 months before going to Cuba. And the whole impetus for going to Cuba was that Cuba was starting to open up at the time. It was like the very early rumblings. I think I was in an airport and I saw a headline that talks were beginning with Cuba. And so I was like, okay, something's going on here. Need to get the ball rolling. And so I'd already met Frank and Yaya on a previous trip.
Okay, that's how you met them? You met them in Cuba surfing?
Yeah, well, sort of. I didn't meet them surfing, but I met them and they sort of story told to me.
Okay.
There were a lot of other components in there, but so I started messaging with them and basically sent this whole list of questions and got an answer to maybe like a third of them, wrote more questions, didn't hear from them for like a month. And at that point in time, internet was just super hard to access. There were only a couple places in Cuba that you couldn't. It was super expensive for Cubans. So tried to make a plan, but just couldn't communicate with them. So by the time we actually got to Cuba and we're on the ground there, it was like, okay, I've spoken to them 3 times. We have no idea what's going on here, but we're going to go do it. So we did.
How did you, okay, so I love Q&A. So then like, what equipment did you bring?
We knew, so we were legally going to Cuba under the journalism, like clause, basically. So we knew we would be able to bring gear. We also know from a lot of experiences I've had shooting out remotely in very far-flung places, big cameras attract a lot of attention. And we knew we didn't want to deal with that. Not only is it a pain to bring cases upon cases of stuff into a foreign country, especially one that's a little bit hard to get around in. We didn't speak Spanish, by the way. We showed up there not knowing the language really at all. But we brought the gear that we knew, we trusted ourselves to be able to use to capture a story and to be able to kind of go with the flow. And the other thing to consider is like, if something breaks, you're not getting a replacement part. No one's mailing you anything. You can't go to a store to buy something. So we had to bring redundancies left, right, and center to figure out, okay, if what's the worst case that could go wrong? Are we going to be capable of dealing with that? So our plan wasn't necessarily to follow a story from A to Z. Our plan was to show up and to be ready for whatever. And that luckily is kind of what Corey and I we're, you know,
You're good at
we've been
it.
friends forever and we've kind of figured that thing out. So that was what we did.
It was just the two of you.
It was us two, and then our other friend Marco Bava, who shot all the underwater stuff and is kind of an Aquaman.
Aquaman. I love those.
Yeah.
Those are some cool shots. So you went, and then because I've obviously never been to Cuba, like I said, were you on when you go with that journalism, like a visa? How long do they give you to be there? Like,
That whole thing is a little bit complicated.
I was just curious if you had, like, when you were thinking about filming it, knowing that you might not get back there, it's not like coming up to the West Coast and just hopping in a car or hopping on a plane, knowing
Yeah.
you had a certain amount of time. Did you set a time frame or?
We intended to go for as long as we could, and we kind of planned on going until they made us leave to some extent. So we went for our first trip. We were there for 3 months.
Oh, okay.
And honestly, a lot of that time was not spent filming anything of any real value. Like, we got some really cool shots and we experienced some really cool moments with our characters, but we were also really in the throes of trying to figure out what film we were going to make. As we started filming it, the goal was originally just make a short film. And then we started to get carried away, kind of getting deeper involved in the lives of our characters. And we started to deviate from that plan on the fly. By the time we left, we were like, are we making a short, or like, what do we have going on here? And yeah, I think we were a little bit lost. And we just kind of kept going back after that as the sort of socio-political climate continued to change. So like, as soon as Trump got into office, we were like, oh, I wonder how that's affected our characters. Well, got to go back to Cuba, got to keep it relevant. And as we kept going back, like, more and more things started happening, and eventually we were like, I think we're making a feature film. And yeah,
I'm really glad you did. I love that you didn't really have a story. You were just going over there to perhaps make a short, and you ended up with the feature movie.
So sort of, yeah, it was more like we had this idea for the short, but we just got interested in what was going on beyond the content of the short film. And so then we just sort of worked our way into no man's land from there, where we're like, okay, we don't have a plan for a feature, but there's more than a short. And so then that was when we sort of got in, we're like, okay, like, we are venturing into sort of uncharted territory, and just sort of trusting the fact that these people that we're spending so much time with have a story that warrants more than what we set out to make. And it turns out they did, which was great.
Yeah, I mean,
they did.
Yeah.
I love like the story of the birth of their child. I thought that was a beautiful storyline, and thinking about the future of surfing and sport in Cuba.
Thanks.
Yeah.
How many hours of footage did you have over all of your trips? Not as a non-filmmaker. I mean, that's
we had a couple hundred hours. The thing is, we're not huge, or I personally, as a cinematographer, am not the hugest fan of just unlimited everything. Like, you can do that. There were certain like restrictions, like we'd only brought so many hard drives, and there were just things that we were paying attention to. And also, eventually, like, at first we did sort of just film everything because we were trying to answer our own questions through the artistic process, which is like, where is this going? Are we going to allow it to go in one direction or another? And there's a story that as we began to speak Spanish a little better, and because like they were trying to speak English, there was just sort of this dialogue that went on, and surfing, the sport of it, became the translator, the bridge that like closed this cultural gap, and basically allowed us to find sync amongst each other for both of our lives moving kind of in a similar direction. And that was when we kind of recognized that that was happening. This experience that we were living was sort of becoming a film in itself. That was when we started to become a little bit more precise with what we were doing. And that was as we started doing that, the story became a little bit more clear, both from a visual standpoint and also from a narrative standpoint. But yeah, I mean, like we would ask our friends, hey, this is what we're doing. What do you think of this? We had other friends like our producer, Tyler, and one of our friends, Dalton. They came down and spent a little bit of time with us, and we would talk with them about what was happening and what they thought about it. And we needed to get an outside perspective, because at a point we were very much in this thing, like completely. Like we moved, I didn't like have a place to live. I just like left my home in Maine and technically moved to Cuba because we didn't know how long we'd be there. So we were just sort of fully in that moment. And that kind of just like relaxing to that, I guess, is what began to guide us at a point in time. And we kind of just followed that through.
Okay. I love it. I love that you just went there and kind of didn't know what you were doing. I was curious, being in Cuba, was there anything that was off limits to film? Like I know that one scene where they're saying, you know, there's no filming here. How often did that happen? And did you find yourselves being kind of like renegades or rogues with your camera? Or what was that like?
One of the hard things that, especially for a film that has sort of political undertones to it, we couldn't film anything that had to do with the government. So like all of the buildings where they were trying to have meetings, that stuff was all off limits, which definitely made it really hard when things started to, when the whole story became this sort of political journey, which I hesitate to call it that, because the film, I feel like we tried really hard to have the film only include politics to the extent that it affected our characters. Yeah. There's obviously, there's a bit of a tangent, but there's obviously like this huge political climate in our world right now. And it's on the tip of everyone's tongues. And in Cuba, it was all this sort of political upheaval happening that made it for this really interesting historical time. But we kept trying to like get our characters to talk about it, and they kept telling us they didn't really care about it. Yeah. And as we were putting the whole film together, we were like, oh, you know, this political theme needs to be less present than we're trying to make it. And it needs to just be what's relevant to them. But anyway, back to the point that you asked, that was a really big challenge because we couldn't film any of that stuff that they were going through. We had to pretty much get them to storytell about it and figure out ways to try and fill it in a way that didn't feel too much like a big gaping hole. Yeah. So that was challenging. A lot of locations were, for the most part, we were left alone. A lot of the places that we were filming, but it was whenever we were like in the city, like right in the heart of the city, we had to be kind of careful. We got stopped a couple times, and especially when we went to the south coast of Cuba near Guantanamo, it was super high security, and a lot of the places that we wanted to film, we were basically stopped, and they were like, anywhere along here, like, we're watching you. You can't film. You can't go in the water. You pretty much can't do anything. So that was I
mean, we tried to respect their like the local rules and regulations as much as we possibly could. It's very difficult because there's no such thing as really true like regulations or laws. Like just like the sport, it's nothing is really allowed unless it's explicitly said you can do this. So we had to also follow these kind of murky guidelines where like we got permits, like we went and paid and like did the thing as best we could. But it was really, really, really difficult to even find people to help us figure this out legally, like some Cuban production companies to help us figure out how to do this. We did the utmost best we could, but at a point we were also like, well, we're kind of just in the dark because no one really wants to tell us the rules. So we just have to kind of go until we get stopped because there's no other way we can see of doing this.
Interesting.
We kept things super low profile though as well. I mean, it was us filming it and doing sound, and we knew from the very beginning that this was not the place to just go and do a full like Hollywood style production. Like it's just, it was never going to be an option. So
I thought you did a really beautiful job. Like you said, it wasn't, I mean, obviously it's the underlying, surfing was illegal. Is it still illegal?
It's still in sort of a gray area. Since the film's concluded, they've been able to get it upgraded to a recreational activity.
Recreation. Okay.
Which means that now it's officially a thing, which before it wasn't a thing, and it was easy for them to crack down on it. But since that elevation, they've been stopped by the police multiple times, and they were actually told explicitly that it was not a sport while they were sort of arguing back and forth. I think, though, that right now, it's actually on the verge of being turned into a proper sport, which is amazing for the surfers.
Well, I think your movie, I mean, it's a beautiful way that your movie can help support it. I mean, I loved seeing them showing your movie and everyone was being so excited about it. And it really kind of stopped me in my tracks. I've got students here. One of them just moved here from Hawaii, and he's this fourth grader and he loves surfing. And I was telling him about your film, and then other kids overheard it. And I had mentioned earlier, we live in Oregon. There's a surf wave in the river that they added. And it just made me really pause of just how lucky we are for the great outdoors, and that the ocean, the most powerful of Mother Earth, and that they can't go surf it. I was just fascinated. It made me feel very grateful, but really just mindful of how lucky we are.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right. And okay, so I have so many questions too. So because I was curious what he was making his surfboards out of. So you just mentioned it's the interior of the refrigerator.
Yeah, the surfboard shaping process, it also depends on where you go.
Okay.
Little
segue, but I was fascinated at how they had to like invent things to make surfboards.
Yeah. So Frank is, a lot of what we were doing too was telling sort of the story of how it began and how it's been maintained. And so a lot of that was explaining how they shaped things from refrigerator materials. But also, if a lot of surfers will watch the film and probably recognize a couple brands that they see some of the surfers on, because surfboards have since made it in. There is a very,
I was like, okay, he's got some stickers on his car and he's got some, so
yeah,
like things had made their way to them.
Yeah, and there are a lot of things that we couldn't really fit into the film. Like Cuba is full of all these things that require explanation. And as we went through iterations of the film, I think we at one point had like a 3-hour cut of the film. We're like, I don't know what to take out. Like, this is all super important information. Yeah. And it's because everything, like grocery shop, like day-to-day life, everything requires some sort of backstory. And we tried to fill all that so that people would leave really having this broad understanding of Cuba. And we had to like condense a lot of ideas in certain ways to get things across. And a lot of other things sort of got left behind. But like everything surf related is these guys like scratching and fighting tooth and nail for it. So like the stickers, the magazines, like a t-shirt with a surf brand on it. Like Frank was telling us, they literally see some random kid whose uncle brought in a bunch of t-shirts and he had a Quicksilver shirt on, and they'd just be like, stop on the street, be like, I need that shirt. Like, what can I do to get that shirt off of you? And so like, it found, all this stuff finds its way to the surfers, but it's not through any real direct means. Now it has since.
Yeah, Seahawks fan. I saw a guy with the Seahawks. I think he had a hat on. I was like, I wonder.
Yeah.
I know what you mean. Sorry to interrupt you.
No.
Yeah, and all that stuff is sort of accelerated a bit since people. I mean, there was a boom where people traveled to Cuba, even though it was a short window. But in that time, like, some surfboards made it in there, and Yaya helps distribute some of the actual modern surfboards around to all the other surfers. And Frank, a lot of what he does too is take beaten up old boards and basically revitalize them. So strip off all the fiberglass, reshape it into something more appropriate for them, and then find glass there in Cuba and remake it into, basically refurbish a surfboard. And as they were all developing surfing in the country, it was a lot more challenging than that. They would basically craft everything from scratch. Just taking the foam out of refrigerators to get the floating core for the board. But then a lot of it was like taking magazines and seeing pictures and sort of dissecting what a board looked like, how it curved. And they would do things to try and mimic that, like the little plug where the leash attaches to. They would do like a water bottle cap with a nail through it. The
Okay.
line down the middle of the board, they had no idea that it was like a wooden stringer. They just thought it was a stylistic thing. So they would take like cassette tape and run it down the middle of the board to make it seem like what they're seeing in these images from the outside world.
Wow.
So yeah, which is really why we got first hooked on the short film, is everything around shaping. And some of that stuff we just had to cut from the film because it just took too much time, and ultimately the film stopped being so much about just their boards, and it was really more about them as people.
You're gonna have to make another movie, probably.
Yeah, we've talked about doing like auxiliary content or something to.
Be interesting to watch, just because so many of us haven't been to Cuba.
Yeah.
And I also I get it too. Like I read some article about, it's like change is fighting with tradition over there. You know, and I could get how they don't want all these Americans coming in and Americanizing it, you know, which unfortunately we do in so many places. And I mean that in a respectful way. I love America, but something so beautiful is just the simplicity of, I like the boards, the fact that those kids at the end are like surfing on board, like plywood. That was just, and they were surfing. I mean,
yeah, they're incredible.
I was just in awe. I just, do you feel like you want to go back? Like, have you been back to show the movie over there? And what do the characters, what do they think of the narrative and how they're portrayed? Are they happy with your movie?
One of the things that was really important to us was the safety of our characters. So we've been showing them cuts of this pretty much nonstop along the way, which is kind of a no-no when you're making a film. You don't really show the people you're making it about it, because that will kind of influence. And honestly, we took a cut back one time and we showed them and they thought it was terrible. So like, granted, we kind of expected, because we kind of just put a bunch of stuff in there and we're like, we need to make sure that they're okay with what's going on. And from that, we were able to dial in what we thought the story was with what they thought the story was. And we managed to find a way that worked, because the point of the film is to show their experience in a really genuine way, because that is the only way that people outside of Cuba are going to understand, in like an emotional sense, what it's actually like to be there. Like this is a tangent, but the thing that hooked me into the story was when I first walked into Frank's room, I saw all these posters on the wall that he'd ripped out of magazines, and they were the same posters that I ripped out as a kid and put on my wall. And knowing that, but then also knowing the amount of like extreme pursuit one had to go through to get that, just sort of opened me up to just listening to him in a very different way than I think I ever would have as just a person who's just like, oh, this is like, meet Frank. He's a kid from Cuba and he surfs. You just do not have that connection. So we worked really hard to figure out how to bring that to life in a way that the audience would get it. We hope anyway. I don't know if we succeeded or not. That's up to you to decide. But like,
it was just beautiful and simple, and the music and the cuts of the wall with all of the, you know, and we all do that with our sports heroes or our music, you know, and again, like music, like sport, it does transcend like different political, you know, issues and agendas and where we live. And no, I thought you did a beautiful job. Him siphoning the gas out of his car, and, you know, the beauty of their family and their message is just, they just want to surf. And I loved, so I know we don't have a ton of time left, but what's your hope for this film in a sense, right? That's always kind of obviously you made it for different purposes, but when you two set out to Cuba with your friend and your cameras, and you have so many film hours and editing on the floor, like, what do you want people to take away? What's your message that you want to take away, their message?
I think one of the things that really struck us, sorry.
Nope, I didn't say anything.
Oh, sorry. I thought, sorry. One of the things that really struck us when we were there was how so much of the environment is so radically different than what we're used to. which is why when we set out, we were trying so hard to explain everything and make sure that you knew everything about why Cuba was different. But ultimately, what really ended up sticking with us was, despite that, how similar their whole group of surfers and young people and artists, all of them had such a similar culture to what we were used to, but all kind of put together in their own way. And so for us, we were watching their whole struggle to surf and the struggle to really connect with people like them and forge a community that looked like how they wanted us to look, in a place that just wasn't very supportive of it. I think we really wanted to broadcast that, like show their community genuinely without sort of the stereotypes, and give a sense of what it's like to live in Cuba and pursue your dreams in this very different place. So I think that was our big goal as we progressed, just showing them for who they are and hoping that people can really relate to them. Another thing is a theme in the film early on. They talk about having to be invisible. And you see all these movements happening in Cuba right now. And one of the messages that we've sort of seen broadcasted across a lot of different platforms is, people are looking to figure out how they can help people in Cuba. And there's not a lot that we can really do on an individual level. And so one of the resounding narratives coming out of Cuba is people saying, well, just amplify our voices. And so for us, I think one of the big things is seeing these people who really they want to have a chance to follow their dreams and chase their ambitious goals. And they feel sort of invisible and like they have to be. And I think for us, that's a big thing. It's just making sure that they reach people.
Amplify their voices. I know that was one of my questions, is like, how can I send them things? Like, I want to send them things, but, items they may need, but, amplifying their voices. I love the way you ended it too, with hope. I feel like so much right now in our country and across the world, we need hope, and the resiliency and hope that they had to continue with their surfing. And I loved seeing the children and, and thinking about the Olympics, and now that surfing's in the Olympics, one of those kids may end up in the Olympics.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
Yeah, we hope so.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of challenges. There's a lot of challenges that are being faced right now because of the political situation that we're still imposing on them. And there's a lot that has nothing to do with the political challenges that are happening in the country. So, like, we have dreams of helping them get the surf economy moving. Before things really took a bad turn not too long ago, the goal was to use this almost as just that broadcast, getting their voice out there, but getting people to see that, hey, not only in Cuba is there good waves, but there are people there who love this and who want to connect. And surfers know, most extreme athletes actually all sort of share this great bond. When you're fighting the elements of nature, you have a connection with other people who do that same thing. And that community is a community that protects themselves, their neighbors, the planet. They understand this other way of being that is very much one of the most positive ways of being that I think I've ever experienced, which is kind of why I dedicated myself so completely to this. And we want to help that, but it's a little bit tricky now.
Yeah.
Only because it's mostly political, and hopefully that can change. And I don't know, we'll see.
Well, I really appreciated your movie. I was just I want to ask these guys questions. I really appreciate the message. It made me more mindful, like I said, and opened a lens that I hadn't thought about before. And I love sports, and I'd never even, again, taking things for granted. So I really appreciate your film. That's why I love documentaries so much. So if people want to see your film, we know it's playing here at the festival. Just at the end of our Q&A, where should they turn? And then if they did want to help, or if you want them to connect, what's the best way to reach you or see your film?
So we're packaging up the film and getting ready to do proper distribution with it. So that's hopefully coming in the next few months. Ideally, we don't have a set date yet. So the best place to follow is probably at the website, havanalibre.film.
Yeah.
And Instagram.
Yeah, Havana Libre film. I mean, reaching out to us personally is the best way to just get a solid connection. We're happy to help connect people. If anyone has interest to go to Cuba, we've been connecting people, surfers, helping people funnel trips in, not we just literally pass people on to Frank and Yaya and their friends, and they kind of work their whole thing out. People have been bringing boards. It's been kind of nice actually watching people from all over the place, mostly from like the short content that we put out. But yeah, havanalibre.film is our website. That's got all of our contacts. And if anyone's interested in helping, that's awesome.
We are also working on
I
a few.
have students that want to help, I'm sure. What was that? Sorry.
Right.
I was just saying we are working on a few ways to very directly help them that we haven't put that out yet. So if you follow along, there may be some cool ways to get involved personally too.
Yeah, because I loved it's a whole nother conversation, but I love the skateboarding aspect too. Like
Yeah.
that culture of skate and surf. I loved seeing these women skating through the streets. It was cool.
Yeah.
Right on.
They're all related, that whole sort of underground world.
Right? I loved it. I was like, ooh, Tony Hawk needs to get involved too.
Yeah.
All sorts of my ideas are spinning. Well, it was really nice to meet the two of you, Seth and Corey. And
Thank you.
Great chatting with you.
I hope everybody watches your film, whether or not you're a surfer or not, you did a great job, I thought, with the narrative. So with all of your trips back and forth, thanks for putting together a great movie. Truly great.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah.
Yeah. I hope to
Fun.
see you again and get up to Bend and you can surf on the wave.
I
love
know.
it.
Yeah, we'll get up there.
You do need to get up here and get it for the festival.
Yeah.
Well, nice to meet you both.
All
Take
right.
care.
Thank you so much.
See you guys. Bye.
Bye.